I watched them from across the street, nestled in the window seat of the Blue Teapot café. My husband Robert stood in our driveway, his arm draped around his assistant Olivia's slender waist as she laughed at something he whispered in her ear. They were unloading expensive luggage from his Tesla, the one I had gifted him for his 40th birthday last year. They looked comfortable together, intimate in a way that comes from months of secret touches and whispered conversations. Robert punched in the security code to our lakefront home, a home he believed was equally his, though my name alone graced the deed. A detail he'd been too preoccupied to notice when we purchased it 3 years ago. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I sipped my chai latte, the warmth of the mug contrasting, with the cold calculation coursing through my veins. 6 weeks had passed since I'd moved out without warning. No note, no text, not a single word. I'd simply vanished, taking only what I needed, leaving the rest as silent witnesses to the life I was strategically dismantling. What surprised me wasn't Robert's infidelity. I'd suspected that for months. What surprised me was how quickly he'd moved Olivia in, how eagerly they'd begun playing house in my absence. Less than a week after I'd disappeared, they were already settling into domestic bliss, their romance no longer confined to hotel rooms and late-night work sessions. It was almost comical how predictable Robert could be. 20 minutes later, as Ryan the barista refreshed my tea, I watched Robert and Olivia disappear inside my home, the heavy oak door swinging shut behind them. I could picture it vividly, Olivia's wide-eyed appreciation of the vaulted ceilings, the Italian marble countertops, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Silver Lake. Robert would be playing tour guide, no doubt taking credit for design, choices that had been exclusively mine, conveniently forgetting it was my inheritance and investment acumen that had made it all possible. "Been watching that house a while," Ryan observed, nodding toward my lakefront property. "Friend of yours live there?" I smiled slightly, eyes never leaving the window. "Something like that. It's complicated." Ryan raised an eyebrow but didn't. Press further. People in Lakeside Heights had mastered the art of polite disinterest. It was part of the community's unspoken social contract. I first met Robert Walker 12 years ago at a charity gala for the Lakeside Heights Children's Hospital. I was 32 then, already making a name for myself at Parkview Financial, where I'd recently been promoted to senior investment strategist. Robert approached me at the bar, all confident smiles and Italian silk. As the rising star CFO of Meridian Technologies, he had the kind of confidence that came from a lifetime of doors opening effortlessly. "That's an impressive donation for someone so young," he'd said, nodding toward the pledge card I'd just filled out. "I believe in investing in the future," I'd replied. "The returns are immeasurable." He'd laughed then, intrigued by my financial metaphor. "Robert Walker," he'd said, extending his hand. "Emily Donovan," I'd replied, not yet knowing I would one day become Emily Walker, and later wish I hadn't. Our courtship was swift and intense. We were married within 14 months, a power couple as the local society pages called us. On paper, we were perfectly matched, both ambitious, both successful, both determined to build something meaningful. For the first 7 years, our marriage thrived on parallel ambitions and shared goals. We renovated our first home together, joined the right clubs, attended the right events. Robert's career at Meridian Technologies flourished as he climbed to CFO, while I quietly built an impressive investment portfolio that significantly outperformed the market. The fractures began to appear in our 8th year together. Robert started working later, his explanations growing vaguer with each passing month. His text messages became guarded, his phone suddenly password protected. The signs were textbook, almost insultingly obvious. I didn't confront him immediately. Confrontation wasn't my style. It gave the other person too much time to construct their defenses, to craft convenient narratives. Instead, I began quietly preparing, documenting, investigating. I hired Caroline Blake, a discreet but thorough private investigator who confirmed what I already suspected. Robert was having an affair with his new executive assistant, Olivia Chen, 26 years old, ambitious, with an MBA from Stanford and a talent for making herself indispensable. The evidence Caroline gathered was comprehensive: dinner meetings that extended into nightcaps at the Lakeview Hotel, weekend conferences that involved minimal attendance at actual business sessions, late-night texts and calls. Still, I bided my time, played the role of the supportive, somewhat naive wife who trusted her husband implicitly. "Another tea, Emily?" Ryan's voice pulled me back to the present. I nodded, watching as a light flickered on in my master bedroom. "How's the new fund performing?" he asked casually. Ryan wasn't just a barista. He was working on his MBA, and we'd developed a friendly rapport over financial discussions during my recent visits to the Blue Teapot. "Exceeding projections," I replied, thinking not of my professional portfolios, but of my personal strategy, a different kind of investment that was about to pay dividends. My phone vibrated with a text from Lisa. "All set for tonight. Need moral support for surveillance duty?" I smiled slightly. Lisa Rodriguez had been my closest friend since college, now serving as general counsel for Parkview Financial. She'd been my confidant throughout this entire process, helping me assemble the team of professionals I'd need: forensic accountants, private investigators, specialized attorneys. She understood why I couldn't simply walk away or confront Robert directly. Some betrayals required a more sophisticated response. "All clear for now," I texted back. "Dinner at Vincenzo's at 8? Across the street, I could see silhouettes moving behind the bedroom curtains. I imagined Olivia exploring my closets, running her fingers over my designer clothes that I'd deliberately left behind, perhaps suggesting to Robert that they clear out all of Emily's things, since I clearly wasn't coming back. What they didn't know was that I'd been monitoring the house all along. I had footage of Olivia's first overnight stay just 4 days after my disappearance. I had documentation of them shopping for groceries together, bringing in takeout, drinking wine on my terrace furniture. I had time-stamped photos of them entering and leaving at hours that made it clear this wasn't a professional relationship or a temporary arrangement. All evidence of abandonment of our marital home, of disrespect for our marriage before any formal separation, evidence that would prove invaluable very soon. What complicated matters, for Robert, not for me, was the business angle. 6 months ago, Robert had been passed over for the CEO position at Meridian Technologies. The job went to Catherine Stone, a brilliant strategist with impeccable credentials who'd been recruited from a competitor. Robert had been furious, convinced the position should have been his by right. His spending habits changed almost overnight. New Tesla, bespoke suits from his favorite Milanese tailor, lavish dinners at exclusive restaurants, and, as I would later discover, expensive gifts for Olivia. Unknown to Robert, I'd been tracking our finances meticulously. I watched as our joint accounts dwindled while my separate accounts, the ones he didn't know about, remained untouched. I observed as he made increasingly risky investments, trying to prove himself worthy of the position he'd lost. And I said nothing, allowing him to believe I was still the trusting wife who deferred to his financial expertise. What Robert had never fully appreciated was that I had always been the financial backbone of our marriage. My salary had consistently outpaced his. My investments had yielded higher returns. The down payment for our lakefront home had come from my inheritance when my father passed away. The renovations had been funded by a particularly successful tech investment I'd made independently. I'd kept these details subtle, knowing how important it was to Robert's ego to believe he was the primary provider. Now that misplaced pride would be his undoing. My phone lit up with another text, this time from Marcus Thompson, my financial advisor. Meridian stock down 12% after earnings miss. Rumors of accounting irregularities. Board meeting called for tomorrow. This was earlier than expected, but not unwelcome. Meridian Technologies had been struggling since losing a major government contract 3 months ago. There had been whispers of creative accounting practices under Robert's financial leadership, though nothing had been proven. Yet. I finished my tea and left a generous tip for Ryan. It was time to move to the next phase of my plan. As I walked to my car, not the luxury SUV Robert knew, but a modest Audi I'd purchased through a holding company months ago, I took one last look at the house. My house. Tomorrow, Robert and Olivia would leave for what they thought would be a romantic weekend at a vineyard resort in Napa Valley. They'd return Sunday evening to find the locks changed, a security system they couldn't bypass, and legal. Notices affixed to every entrance. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, I had dinner with Lisa, followed by final preparations with my legal team. The end game was approaching, and timing was everything. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. At Vincenzo's, I checked my reflection in the window before entering. Composed, confident, not a hair out of place. Nothing in my appearance suggested a woman whose marriage was imploding. Nothing revealed the calculated fury beneath my carefully maintained facade. "You look terrifyingly calm," Lisa observed as I slid into the booth across from her. "I don't know whether to be impressed or concerned." "Be impressed," I said, accepting the glass of Cabernet she'd already ordered for me. "Everything is proceeding exactly as planned." Lisa leaned forward, lowering her voice. "And you're certain about the house? No loopholes he could exploit?" "Absolutely certain. The deed is in my name only. I paid the down payment from my separate account. I've handled all the property taxes through my personal accounts. Robert's name doesn't appear on a single document related to ownership." "And he never questioned this arrangement?" Lisa asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. I allowed myself a small smile. Robert has always been more interested in appearances than details. As long as he could boast about our lakefront estate at dinner parties, he never bothered to verify whose name was actually on the deed. Lisa shook her head, both amused and appalled. "Men like Robert never see women like you coming, do they? That's what makes this possible," I replied, studying the menu though I already knew what I would order. "He underestimated me from the beginning, first as an asset, then as an opponent." The conversation paused as our server approached. We ordered, maintaining the appearance of two friends enjoying a casual dinner. Once we were alone again, Lisa pulled out her tablet, switching to business mode. "I've reviewed all the documentation from the forensic accountants," she said. "Robert has been systematically moving money from your joint accounts into private ones for the past 9 months. Some of it was used for gifts for Olivia, jewelry, weekend getaways, that sort of thing. But the bulk appears to be an attempt to shield assets in anticipation of a potential divorce." I nodded, unsurprised. "Which plays perfectly into our hands. Hiding marital assets is frowned upon by divorce courts." "There's more," Lisa continued, her expression grim. "He's been lying about Meridian's stability. The company is under SEC investigation, rumors of indictments coming within weeks. Robert's position is particularly vulnerable. This was new information, but it didn't change my strategy. If anything, it accelerated my timeline. Robert would be even more desperate now, more likely to make mistakes." "Do you think he moved Olivia in so quickly because he's about to lose everything?" Lisa asked, setting up a backup plan. I considered this, taking a measured sip of wine. Possibly. Or perhaps he truly believes I'll never come back. Either way, it demonstrates his character, or lack thereof. Our food arrived, and we ate with the efficiency of two professionals accustomed to working lunches and strategic dinners. Between bites, we finalized details for the coming week. The locksmith scheduled for tomorrow afternoon, the security team on standby, the formal notices prepared by Diane. "What about your personal items still in the house?" Lisa asked, signaling for the check. "Aren't you worried about what might happen to them?" "Everything of true value, financially or sentimentally, is already secured," I assured her. "What remains is either replaceable or strategically left behind. Besides, we have detailed inventory and photographic evidence of everything in that house. If a single item goes missing, it becomes another point in our favor." Lisa studied me with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" "I've had years to prepare," I replied simply. Later that night in my temporary apartment, a sleek, minimalist space in a secure building downtown, I reviewed the final preparations for tomorrow. The locksmith was confirmed for 2 p.m., when surveillance confirmed Robert and Olivia would be well on their way to Napa. The security team would arrive at 2:30 to install the new system and remain on site until Sunday evening. Diane would deliver the legal notices at 3:00 p.m., ensuring everything was properly documented. I opened my laptop and checked the tracking app I'd installed on Robert's phone months ago, another piece of insurance I'd never expected to need. The dot showed him at our house, presumably settling in for the night with Olivia. Tomorrow morning, they'd pack for their weekend getaway, blissfully unaware of what awaited them upon their return. As I prepared for bed, I felt no sadness, no regret, not even anger anymore. Those emotions had burned away months ago, leaving only cool determination in their place. Robert had made his choices. Now it was time for him to face the consequences. My phone buzzed with a final text from Diane. "Everything in place for tomorrow. Last chance to reconsider approach. More conventional options still available." I typed my response without hesitation. "Proceed as planned. They deserve the weekend of false security before reality hits." Setting my phone aside, I slipped between cool sheets and closed my eyes. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of the end for Robert's careful illusions. By this time next week, he would understand exactly who he had betrayed. Not the compliant, supportive wife he thought he knew, but a woman who had anticipated his every move and prepared accordingly. A woman who owned the very ground beneath his feet and was about to reclaim it. Morning arrived with a clarity that matched my state of mind. I rose early, completed my usual fitness routine, and dressed with particular care. A sleek charcoal suit that projected authority, pearls that had been my mother's, subtle makeup that enhanced rather than concealed. Today wasn't about confrontation. Robert and Olivia would be long gone before any of my team arrived at the house. Today was about preparation, about setting the stage for Sunday's revelation. My phone buzzed with a text from my surveillance contact. "Subjects loading car now. Estimated departure within 30 minutes. Perfect timing." I gathered my essentials and headed out, not to the house, but to Diane's office for our final briefing. As I drove, I allowed myself to picture Robert and Olivia's faces when they returned from their romantic weekend to find themselves locked out of my home, legal notices demanding their immediate and permanent departure. The thought brought a small, satisfied smile to my face as I merged onto the highway, heading toward the next chapter of my carefully orchestrated plan. Diane Powell's law office occupied the 15th floor of the Olympus Tower, a gleaming monument to corporate success in downtown Lakeside Heights. Unlike the warm, relationship-focused family law practices with their comfortable couches and inspirational wall art, Powell legal strategies embraced a different aesthetic: sleek glass, brushed steel, and an atmosphere that practically hummed with efficient ruthlessness. "Emily," Diane greeted me, emerging from her corner office precisely on time. At 53, Diane had built her reputation as the most feared divorce attorney in 3 counties. She specialized in high-stakes cases where one spouse had significantly wronged the other: infidelity, financial deception, abandonment. Judges respected her, opposing counsel feared her, and clients like me valued her ruthless efficiency. "Confirmation just came through," she said as she led me into her office. "Your husband and his companion departed the residence approximately 14 minutes ago. Our surveillance indicates they're headed toward Napa as expected." I nodded, unsurprised. Robert was nothing if not predictable, a quality that had once been comforting, but had ultimately made this entire process almost too easy. "The locksmith is scheduled for 2:00, Diane continued, consulting her tablet as we sat at her conference table. "Security team at 2:30, and I'll personally deliver the notices at 3:00. She glanced up. "You're certain you don't want to be present?" "Absolutely certain," I replied. "My presence would only create an opportunity for confrontation. Better to let the legal documents speak for themselves." Diane nodded approvingly. She appreciated clients who understood strategy over emotion. "Now, let's review the documentation once more." She spread several folders across the table, each labeled with meticulous precision: property deed, financial evidence, infidelity documentation, abandonment of marital property. For the next hour, we methodically went through each folder, ensuring every document was properly prepared, every photograph dated and authenticated, every financial record verified. The case we were building wasn't just about reclaiming my house, it was about ensuring Robert couldn't contest any aspect of the divorce settlement I would eventually offer. "The judge assigned to your case is Harrington," Diane noted, making a small annotation on her legal pad. "She has little patience for infidelity and even less for financial deception. The evidence of Robert moving his girlfriend into the marital home so quickly after your disappearance, without filing any missing person report, will not go over well." "And the Meridian file?" I asked, referring to the discreet investigation we'd commissioned into Meridian Technologies' financial troubles. Diane slid another folder across the table. "Fresh this morning. The SEC investigation is accelerating. 4 senior executives have already received target letters. Robert isn't among them yet, but the financial department is under particular scrutiny." I scanned the report, noting the projected timeline for potential indictments, the specific transactions being investigated, the clients who had already withdrawn their investments. Robert's professional world was collapsing around him, and he had no idea I knew. "How much time does he have before this becomes public?" I asked. 2 weeks, 3 at most," Diane replied. "When it breaks, the company's stock will plummet. Further, any investments tied to their funds will be essentially worthless." I closed the folder, a new piece slotting into my understanding of Robert's recent behavior. "That explains the sudden liquidation of our joint investments last month. He's trying to get ahead of the crash. Moving assets before a divorce filing is problematic enough," Diane said. "Moving them while aware of pending federal securities charges is considerably worse. Our forensic accountant has tracked 3 separate transfers to offshore accounts in the past 6 weeks. Can we prove Robert knew about the investigation before making those transfers?" Diane's smile was small but satisfied. His personal email to Olivia from February 8th, I quote, "The SEC is sniffing around Johnson's division. Need to move quickly before this blows up." I raised an eyebrow. "You have access to his personal emails?" "Let's just say Olivia's cloud. Storage security is significantly less robust than it should be for someone with access to potentially sensitive financial information," Diane replied with professional detachment. "Also, she really should know better than to use her work computer for personal communications." By noon, we had finalized all preparations. The locksmith and security team were confirmed, the legal notices prepared and notarized, and a detailed inventory of all items in the house updated one final time. What happens when they return on Sunday and find themselves locked out? I asked, though I already knew the answer. They'll call you, obviously, Diane replied. When that fails, they'll likely call a locksmith themselves, at which point they'll discover the new security system and the legal notices. The notices clearly state that any attempt to enter the property without your express permission will constitute trespassing. Given that the deed is solely in your name and Robert has been documented moving another woman into the property, his legal standing is extremely shaky. He'll be furious, I noted without particular concern. Undoubtedly. But fury doesn't change legal reality. Diane gathered the folders, returning them to her secure cabinet. We've arranged for a security detail to monitor the property Sunday evening through Monday morning, just in case he decides to test the boundaries. As our meeting concluded, my phone buzzed with a text from the surveillance team. Subjects. Arrived at Vineyard Resort 11:53 a.m. All clear at primary residence. Everything's on schedule, I informed Diane. They've reached Napa. She nodded, walking me to her office door. I'll call you when everything's completed this afternoon. In the meantime, I suggest you proceed with your day as planned. Best, to establish normal patterns of behavior. My normal pattern for today included a scheduled lunch with the Parkview Financial Board chairman, followed by a meeting with the underwriters for our new emerging markets fund. Everyone at work believed I was in the midst of a trial separation, a simplified version of the truth that explained my temporary change of address without inviting unwanted questions or pity. As I left Diane's building, I felt strangely light, as though I'd set down a heavy burden I'd been carrying for years. In many ways, I had. The weight of Robert's deception, my silent knowledge of his betrayal, the careful maintenance of our facade of marital harmony. All of it was finally being shed, replaced by the clean, clear lines of legal procedure and financial disentanglement. My phone buzzed again as I reached my car, this time from Lisa. Lunch still on for 1:30? Have updates on ours workplace situation. I texted back a quick confirmation. Lisa's position as general counsel at Parkview gave her access to information, networks that complemented my own. Her updates were always valuable. The restaurant Lisa had chosen was deliberately casual, a farm-to-table café tucked between a bookstore and a boutique florist in the city's arts district. Not the kind of place Robert or any of his colleagues would frequent, which made it perfect for our purposes. Lisa was already seated at a corner table when I arrived, her typical corporate attire exchanged for weekend casual, though even her casual maintained an elegance that spoke of careful curation. You look suspiciously serene for someone in the middle of dismantling her marriage, she observed as I sat down. I prefer to think of it as reorganizing my life, I replied, accepting the menu from our server. Once we'd ordered, Lisa leaned forward, her voice lowered. So Navarro, my contact in the financial crimes division, called this morning. The Meridian investigation has expanded. They're looking at potential RICO charges now. I set down my water glass carefully. Racketeering? That's more serious than we thought. Apparently, some of the senior executives were running what amounts to a Ponzi scheme for certain high-value clients. The house of cards is collapsing. Spectacularly. Lisa's expression was grim. Robert's department was handling some of these special accounts. Even if he wasn't directly involved in creating the scheme, he had to have known something wasn't right. This complicated matters, potentially, for the better from my perspective. If Robert faced criminal charges, his ability to contest our divorce or make claims on my assets would be severely compromised. Timeline? I asked. Grand jury convenes next week. Indictments likely within the month. Our food arrived momentarily, pausing the conversation. As we ate, I considered the implications of this new information. Robert was not just facing a divorce and the loss of his home. He was potentially looking at criminal charges, professional disgrace, and financial ruin. A normal person might feel some sympathy, some residual concern for a man they'd spent 12 years married to. I searched my heart and found none. Robert had made his choices, professional and personal, with a cavalier disregard for consequences. Now those consequences were arriving, and I felt no obligation to shield him from them. "Any word about Olivia's involvement?" I asked, spearing a forkful of salad. Lisa shook her head. "As far as we know, she's just the executive assistant, who became the girlfriend. No indication she's involved in the financial issues." She hesitated. Although what? Navarro mentioned something interesting. Apparently, Olivia was previously employed at Zenith Capital, another firm that came under SEC investigation 3 years ago. She left just before the scandal broke. Coincidence, maybe? I filed this information away for future reference. Whether Olivia was merely attracted to powerful, corrupt men or actually involved in their schemes was unclear. Either way, she'd hitched her wagon to the wrong horse this time. "What time is the locksmith arriving?" Lisa asked, changing the subject. 2. Everything should be completed by 4. Lisa studied me over her iced tea. "And you're really just going to let them return to a locked house with no warning? No conversation?" "What conversation would you suggest?" I countered. "Hello, Robert. Just wanted to let you know that the house you moved your girlfriend into is actually mine, and I'd like you both to leave immediately." "When you put it that way," Lisa conceded with a small smile. "Besides," I continued, "this approach sends a clearer message. Robert needs to understand that I've been 3 steps ahead of him this entire time, that every move he thought was so clever was anticipated and countered before he even made it." "Remind me never to cross you," Lisa said, only half joking. After lunch, I drove to my temporary apartment to prepare for the afternoon's operations. At precisely 1:45 p.m., I received confirmation that the locksmith was en route to the house. At 2:10, the first photos arrived on my secure server, close-ups, of the new deadbolts being installed, the old keys rendered useless. By 2:40, the security team had arrived and begun installation of the new system, one that required both a code and biometric confirmation for entry. My fingerprints and retinal scan were already programmed as the only authorized access points. At 3:05, Diane texted, "Notices posted on all entries. Copies sent electronically to R's email and delivered physically to his office. Security confirms installation complete. Property secured." I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It was done. My house was reclaimed, legally and physically. Now came the waiting game. To occupy myself during this interlude, I focused on practical matters, reviewing Parkview's quarterly financial projections, preparing notes for Monday's budget meeting, answering work emails that had accumulated over the past few days. I deliberately avoided checking the surveillance, feeds from the house or Robert's location. There was nothing more to see until Sunday evening. That night, I treated myself to a rare indulgence, ordering in from my favorite sushi restaurant, opening a bottle of exceptional sake I'd been saving, and watching a film I'd been wanting to see. Small celebrations for small victories. The true confrontation was still to come. Sunday arrived with unexpected serenity. I spent the morning at a yoga class, followed by brunch with an old college friend who knew nothing of my marital situation. The normality was refreshing, a reminder that life continued beyond the drama currently unfolding in my personal sphere. By late afternoon, however, my focus had shifted back to the impending confrontation. According to the tracking data, Robert and Olivia had left the Vineyard Resort at 3:23 p.m. Their typical drive time would put them back at the house between 5:30 and 6 p.m. At 5:15, I received confirmation that the security team was in position, unmarked cars at strategic points with clear views of all entrances to the property. Their instructions were clear: observe and document, but intervene only if there was an attempt to forcibly enter the house or if the situation escalated to potential violence. At 5:42, the notification I'd been waiting for. Subject's vehicle approaching neighborhood, ETA at property approximately 3 minutes. I settled into the chair in my home office, iPad propped on the desk displaying the feeds from the security cameras now positioned around my house. Split screens showed the driveway, front entrance, back door, and side gate. Everything was quiet, peaceful. For now. At 5:46, Robert's Tesla turned into the driveway. I watched as he and Olivia emerged from the car, laughing about something, completely unaware of what awaited them. They unloaded their weekend bags from the trunk, and Robert led the way to the front door. The first hint of trouble came when his key failed to turn in the lock. I observed his confusion, the repeated attempts, the growing frustration. Olivia said something, gesturing at the door. Robert tried again, more forcefully this time. Finally, he stepped back, running a hand through his hair in obvious frustration. Olivia pointed to something, the legal notice prominently affixed to the door. Robert ripped it off, holding it closer to read in the fading evening light. Even without audio, I could track the progression of his reaction. Confusion-giving, way to disbelief, then anger. He crumpled the notice, threw it to the ground, then pulled out his phone. I knew exactly who he was calling. On cue, my phone began to ring, Robert's name and photo appearing on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. On the security feed, I watched him leave another furious message, his third in as many minutes. Olivia was on her phone too, perhaps calling a locksmith or researching what to do when locked out of your home. The expected text arrived moments later. "What the hell is going on? Why are the locks changed? Call me immediately." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say that the legal notices hadn't already communicated. Robert's next move was predictable. He stormed around to the back door, Olivia trailing behind, only to find it similarly secured with a matching legal notice. His body language conveyed his escalating rage, the tight shoulders, the clenched fists, the aggressive stance. When he returned to the front yard, he was already on his phone again, likely calling a locksmith. I knew exactly how that conversation would go. The security system we'd installed was registered with all local locksmith services. Any legitimate business would refuse the job once they ran the address through their system and saw the legal hold. Sure enough, Robert's expression confirmed my prediction. Whoever he was speaking to had clearly declined his request. He ended the call with visible anger, then immediately dialed again. Same result, judging by his reaction. Olivia appeared, to be growing uncomfortable, hugging herself as the evening air cooled. She said something to Robert, who snapped back at her before returning to his futile attempts to contact me. By the 10th call, all sent straight to voicemail, Robert had progressed to pounding on the front door and shouting. The security team texted an update. Subject becoming volatile. Neighbors taking notice. Security prepared to intervene if necessary. I texted back, hold positions unless property damage occurs or physical threats made. Just as I sent this instruction, Robert appeared to have a new idea. He returned to his car, rummaged through the trunk, and emerged with what looked like a tire iron. My heart rate increased slightly. Was he actually going to try to break in? Before he could approach the house, however, a police cruiser turned onto the street, slowing as it neared my property. One of the neighbors must have called in a disturbance. Perfect. The officers approached Robert, who was still holding the tire iron. A brief conversation ensued, during which I could see Robert gesturing wildly at the house, likely claiming it was his home that he was locked out. One officer examined the legal notice while the other spoke into his radio, presumably running the address to check property records. The encounter ended exactly as I anticipated. The officers clearly informed Robert that the property was registered solely in my name, that the legal notices were valid, and that any attempt to enter without permission would constitute criminal trespassing. They instructed him to remove his vehicle from the driveway and leave the premises. Robert's fury was evident even on the small screen, the red face, the aggressive posturing, the finger pointing. But against uniformed officers with clear property records, his rage was impotent. Eventually, he stormed back to his car, Olivia hurrying behind him with their weekend bags. As they drove away, I received a final text from the security team. Subjects departing area. Officers remaining to file incident. Report. All documented. I set down my phone and leaned back in my chair, letting out a long, slow breath. Phase 1 complete. My phone buzzed again. Diane this time. Police report being filed. Officers confirmed legal notices properly served. Security staying in position overnight as planned. Well executed, Emily. The last sentence brought an unexpected sense of satisfaction. Yes, it had been well executed. From the meticulous documentation of Robert's infidelity to the strategic timing of my disappearance, from the careful monitoring of his financial maneuvers to today's reclamation of my property. Every step calculated, every reaction anticipated. I knew what came next. Robert would regroup, consult attorneys, and attempt to mount a counteroffensive. He would discover that his options were severely limited by the property deed, the evidence of infidelity, the documented financial deceptions, and now the police report regarding his attempt to enter my house with a potential weapon. But that was tomorrow's battle. Tonight, I would sleep peacefully, knowing that Robert and Olivia were scrambling to find accommodations, their romantic weekend shattered, their sense of security demolished. My phone buzzed one more time, a text from Robert, his final attempt of the evening. "You won't get away with this. You have no idea what you're up against. This is my house, too." I smiled faintly at his predictable bluster. How little he knew, how little he had ever known about me, about my capabilities, about the careful groundwork I'd been laying for years. I typed back a single reply, the only communication I would offer him until our lawyers met formally. "Check the property deed, Robert. You never owned a thing." Then I turned off my phone, poured myself a glass of wine, and settled in for a quiet evening alone. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new strategies to implement. But tonight, I savored this small victory, the first public move in a game that had been silently unfolding for months. Robert had always underestimated me. By the time this was over, he would never make that mistake again. Morning arrived with the expected deluge. 17 missed calls from Robert, 32 text messages ranging from threats to pleas to accusations, 4 voicemails that progressively declined in coherence and increased in volume. More importantly, there were updates from Diane. Robert had contacted 3 separate law firms overnight. 2 had declined to represent him after preliminary research into the property records. The third, Winters and Goldstein, known for aggressive litigation regardless of case merit, had scheduled a consultation for 9 p.m. I forwarded this information to Lisa, who responded immediately. W&G has conflicts with 4 Parkview Board members. 1 call from me and they'll drop him like radioactive waste. I considered this option briefly before declining. Let him waste his money on futile consultations. More evidence of poor judgment. My office voicemail included an angry message from Robert demanding I call him immediately to sort out this misunderstanding. His corporate email, which I still had access to through backdoor channels, showed frantic messages to colleagues seeking recommendations for real estate attorneys and temporary housing options. Most telling was an exchange with his direct supervisor. Need emergency personal leave today. Family situation requires immediate attention. The response was not what Robert had likely hoped for. Request noted. Be advised the executive committee is meeting at 10 a.m. regarding department audit findings. Your presence is mandatory. Robert's world was collapsing on multiple fronts simultaneously, exactly as I had planned. By the end of today, he would be facing not just the loss of his home and marriage, but potentially his career and freedom as well. I dressed with particular care for my own day, selecting a power suit that projected confidence and control. Today, I would attend the Parkview board meeting where our new emerging markets fund would be finalized, a professional triumph that would secure my position for years to come. As I applied my makeup, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. Robert had always defined our success as a couple through his achievements, his career advances, his social connections. He had never fully appreciated that my quiet competence, my strategic planning, my financial acumen were the true foundation of everything we had built. Now he would learn that lesson the hard way, as everything he thought was his crumbled beneath him, and everything that was truly mine remained rock solid. My phone buzzed with a text from Diane. Court filing prepared, ready to proceed on your command. When would you like to serve him? I considered the timeline carefully before responding. Wait until after the Meridian Technologies announcement. Maximum impact. Diane's reply was immediate and appreciative. Strategically sound. Will prepare accordingly. I slipped my phone into my purse and headed out, ready to face the day, ready to move forward with the next phase of my carefully orchestrated plan. Robert thought yesterday's locked door was the battle. He had no idea it was merely the opening move in a much larger war, one he had already lost before it even began. The Parkview Financial Board meeting proceeded exactly as I'd anticipated. Unanimous. Approval for the Emerging Markets Fund I'd spent 14 months developing. As chief investment strategist, I'd crafted a risk management structure that protected our clients' assets while maximizing growth potential in volatile economies. The chairman's congratulatory handshake and the admiring nods from my fellow executives provided a moment of professional satisfaction that contrasted sharply with the personal chaos I was methodically navigating. Outstanding work, Emily, Jordan Blackwell, the board chairman, said as we exited the conference room. The precision of your market projections continues to impress us all. Thank you, I replied with a modest smile. It's simply a matter of anticipating variables and planning accordingly. If only he knew how broadly that philosophy extended beyond my professional life. Back in my office, I found 3 more missed calls from Robert and a text from Diane. Winters and Goldstein declined representation after consultation. Are now attempting to secure Morrison and Hayes. Morrison and Hayes, a mid-tier firm known for taking cases others rejected. Their reputation was built on aggressive tactics rather than legal brilliance. They'd be expensive and ultimately ineffective, but they might create temporary complications. I forwarded this information to Lisa, who responded almost immediately. M&H represent 2 institutional clients currently negotiating major investments in our new fund. Potential conflict. Want me to make a call? Again, I declined the assistance. Let him proceed. More financial damage, more desperate decisions. My professional mask remained firmly in place as I conducted afternoon meetings, reviewed departmental portfolios, and finalized quarterly projections. No one at Parkview would have guessed that I was simultaneously orchestrating the systematic dismantling of my marriage and my husband's carefully constructed facade. At 3:42 p.m., a breaking news alert flashed across my computer screen. Federal authorities raid Meridian Technologies offices. Attached was aerial footage of dark-suited FBI agents entering the gleaming downtown headquarters where Robert had built his career. My phone buzzed immediately with a text from Lisa. Happening now. 6 senior execs taken in for questioning. Navarro says indictments coming tomorrow. ours department specifically mentioned in warrants. I allowed myself exactly 5 seconds to process this development before responding. Time to accelerate our timeline. Contact Diane. Events were unfolding faster than even I had projected. The federal investigation had moved from quiet inquiry to public action, and Robert was now caught in a perfect storm. Personal betrayal exposed, professional misconduct under investigation, legal options dwindling, and financial resources under scrutiny. I sent a brief message to Diane. Move forward with divorce filing tomorrow morning. Maximum media coverage. Her response was equally concise. Documents prepared. 9 a.m. Filing for maximum news cycle impact. Coordination with financial press arranged. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. Robert would be dealing with the fallout from the federal raid while simultaneously being served with divorce papers outlining his infidelity, financial misconduct, and false claims to property ownership, all while scrambling for new accommodations and legal representation. As the workday ended, I maintained my usual routine, reviewing final emails, organizing my desk for tomorrow, exchanging pleasantries with colleagues as I departed. No one would see anything unusual in my demeanor or schedule. Maintaining normal patterns was crucial to controlling the narrative that would inevitably emerge once news of my divorce filing became public. In my car, I checked the tracking app one final time. Robert's location showed him still at Meridian Technologies' offices, presumably being questioned by federal agents or desperately trying to salvage client relationships. Either way, he was occupying exactly the position I needed him in: distracted, defensive, and diminished. Instead of returning to my temporary apartment, I directed my car toward a different destination: the house. My house. For the first time since implementing my plan, I would return to reclaim the space that had been temporarily invaded by Robert and his girlfriend. The security team had been notified of my arrival, and they verified my identity as I approached. The new locks responded to my key, the new security system to my biometric data. Stepping across the threshold felt like reclaiming territory, not just physical space, but the psychological ground that Robert had attempted to colonize with his betrayal. Inside, the house looked much as I had left it 6 weeks ago, with subtle differences that spoke volumes about the brief occupation. Olivia's designer coat hung in the entryway closet. A different brand of coffee sat on the kitchen counter. 2 wine glasses remained in the sink from their pre-weekend departure. I moved methodically through the rooms, noting each intrusion, each alteration. In the master bedroom, Olivia's clothes hung alongside mine in the closet, her designer dresses nudging against my tailored suits as if they belonged there. Her cosmetics cluttered the bathroom vanity I had always kept meticulously organized. Most telling was the nightstand on what had been Robert's side of the bed: a woman's novel, a pair of reading glasses that weren't mine, a different brand of hand cream than I used. Olivia hadn't just visited. She had begun establishing permanence, claiming space, settling in. The guest bedroom had been converted to a makeshift office for Robert. His laptop docking station, dual monitors, and stacks of financial reports arranged with the precision he always insisted on for his workspace. A bottle of his preferred scotch sat half empty on the antique side table that had been my grandmother's. I took photographs of everything, additional evidence for the divorce proceedings, should it become necessary. Then I began the process of reclamation. Olivia's clothes were removed from the closet, folded neatly, and placed in the designer luggage she had left in the corner of the room. Her toiletries were gathered from the bathroom, wrapped in tissue paper, and added to the suitcase. Every trace of her presence was methodically erased, not with anger, but with the same clinical efficiency I brought to portfolio reviews. Robert's personal items received similar treatment. business clothes segregated from casual wear, shoes paired, and placed in their original boxes, cufflinks and watches secured in their cases. His files were organized chronologically, electronic equipment disconnected and packed properly. Even his scotch was recorked and added to the collection. By the time I finished, 8 perfectly packed suitcases and storage containers lined the foyer, everything Robert and Olivia had brought into my house, ready for their removal. Nothing damaged, nothing destroyed, nothing missing. I had erased their presence without diminishing any possessions they could claim as their own. The final touch was a printed notice placed atop the luggage. Personal items ready for retrieval. Contact Powell Legal Strategies to arrange supervised collection. Any attempt to enter property without prior arrangement will be considered trespassing and prosecuted accordingly. As I completed this task, my phone buzzed with another news alert. Meridian Technologies trading suspended. SEC cites irregular accounting practices in managed accounts. Accompanying the headline was a stock photo of the firm's executive team from last year's annual report. Robert stood at the edge of the group, smiling confidently in his bespoke suit, unaware that the image would now be used to illustrate his firm's downfall. I forwarded the alert to Diane with a simple question. Impact on timeline? Her response was immediate. Proceeding as planned. 9 a.m. Filing. Media already monitoring courthouse for financial crimes developments. Our filing will provide additional context they'll eagerly report. Perfect. The business press would be primed to connect Robert's professional misconduct with his personal failures. The narrative would write itself. Senior investment executive under federal investigation also accused of marital infidelity and attempted property theft. His credibility would be destroyed on all fronts simultaneously. I spent that night in my reclaimed home, sleeping in freshly made beds with new linens I'd brought with me. The security team remained stationed outside, ensuring no unexpected visits disturbed my first night back in my own space. Morning arrived with a flurry of activity. At 8:45 a.m., Diane texted, en route to courthouse, filing prepared with expedited processing request. At 9:12 a.m., filing complete. Court has assigned case number. Initial hearing date request submitted for earliest available slot. At 9:37 a.m., process server en route to Meridian Technologies offices with divorce papers. Media alerted to significant development in ongoing financial investigation. I monitored these developments from my Parkview office. Maintaining my normal Monday schedule of department head meetings and investment reviews. To all outward appearances, I was simply the efficient, focused chief investment strategist everyone had come to rely on. No one would connect me to the breaking news story until I chose to reveal that connection. At 11:23 a.m., the text I'd been waiting for arrived from Diane. Papers served. R received documents in front of colleagues and federal investigators. Maximum impact achieved. I could picture the scene perfectly. Robert being handed legal documents while already under scrutiny from federal authorities. His professional, mask cracking as he realized the papers outlined not just divorce proceedings, but detailed allegations of infidelity, financial misconduct, and false property claims. His colleagues watching his composure shatter. The federal investigators noting his emotional response for future reference. By noon, the story had broken across multiple financial news outlets. Meridian Technologies executive served with divorce papers amid federal raid. One particularly thorough reporter had already connected the dots. Court records show investment. Director's wife owns property he claimed as marital asset. Robert's professional and personal collapse was now public knowledge, his humiliation complete and documented, just as I had planned. My phone began ringing incessantly. Calls from Robert, from unknown numbers likely reporters, from mutual acquaintances curious about the breaking story. I declined them all, maintaining my focus on Parkview business as if nothing unusual was occurring. Lisa appeared in my office doorway just after my last scheduled meeting, closing the door behind her. "It's everywhere," she said without preamble. "Every financial news outlet, local stations, even some national coverage because of the SEC angle. Robert's face is all over the business channels." I nodded, unsurprised. "Has he attempted to contact you?" "3 calls in the past hour," Lisa confirmed. I didn't answer. Hospital counsel has no comment on the personal matters of employees' spouses. "And the board?" "Blackwell called an emergency executive session for 3 p.m. They'll want reassurance that this won't impact Parkview operations or the Emerging Markets Fund." I glanced at my watch. "I'll prepare a statement addressing potential concerns." Lisa studied me with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You're remarkably calm for someone whose divorce has just become breaking news. This is merely the implementation phase of a plan that's been in development for months," I replied. "Everything is proceeding as anticipated." The Parkview board meeting was brief and focused. I presented a concise overview of my personal situation, emphasizing that my financial holdings were entirely separate from Robert's, that the house and all major assets were solely in my name, and that the divorce proceedings would not impact my professional responsibilities or Parkview's investment projects. "The timing of these revelations is unfortunate but ultimately beneficial," I concluded. "With everything now in the open, there will be no lingering questions or concerns that might distract from our work going forward." Jordan Blackwell voiced the board's unanimous support, noting that my characteristic foresight in keeping my financial affairs separate from Robert's demonstrated the same prudence I brought to managing Parkview's portfolios. By the time I left Parkview that evening, 3 significant developments had occurred. First, Meridian Technologies had announced the immediate suspension of 5 executives, including Robert. Second, the SEC had filed formal charges against the firm for securities fraud, market manipulation, and fiduciary negligence. And third, Robert had been photographed by news crews leaving the firm's offices with a cardboard box of personal items, the eye, universal symbol of unceremonious termination. As I drove home, my phone rang with a call from a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered through the car's Bluetooth system. "Emily." Olivia's voice, unexpectedly steady, despite the circumstances. "We need to talk." "I believe my attorney has provided instructions for retrieving your personal items," I replied, maintaining the same professional tone I would use with a difficult vendor. "This isn't about clothes or toiletries," she said, an edge creeping into her voice. "This is about Robert, about what you're doing to him." I allowed a moment of silence before responding. "What I'm doing to him? Interesting perspective." "He's being destroyed professionally because of your timing," Olivia continued. "You could have filed for divorce any time. You deliberately coordinated with the SEC investigation to maximize damage." "An intriguing theory," I conceded, slowing for a red light, though it presumes I have influence over federal regulatory agencies. "Don't play innocent," Olivia snapped. "I've worked in financial firms long enough to recognize a coordinated attack. You've been planning this for months." "And you've been sleeping with my husband for months," I countered, my voice remaining calm. "Perhaps longer. Your professional insights should have warned you about the risks of associating with someone like Robert, personally and professionally." A pause then. "What do you want? Money? Some sort of revenge? What would it take to end this scorched earth campaign?" The light turned green, and I accelerated smoothly. "I already have what I want, Olivia. My house, my assets, my reputation, intact. Robert's actions, professional and personal, have consequences. He's experiencing them now, as are you, by association. You cold, calculating? No, I corrected her. Methodical, strategic, forward-thinking. The qualities Robert once claimed to value in me before he decided a younger, more compliant companion would better serve his ego. Another pause, longer this time. When Olivia spoke again, her voice had changed, less confrontational, more calculating. What if I have information? Things Robert told me about your finances, about Parkview's dealings, things that might interest certain investigators? There it was, the threat beneath the anger. I smiled slightly, though she couldn't see it. That would be ill-advised, for 2 reasons, I replied. First, any financial insights Robert shared with you were likely fabrications designed to impress you with his non-existent acumen. And second, false allegations to regulatory agencies are themselves prosecutable offenses, as I'm sure you're aware from your extensive experience in financial firms. I could almost hear her recalculating, trying to find leverage that didn't exist. Retrieval of your personal items can be arranged for tomorrow between 2 and 4 p.m., I continued. A representative from Powell Legal Strategies will be present to supervise and document the process. If that time frame doesn't work for you, alternative arrangements can be discussed with my attorney. Good evening, Olivia. I ended the call before she could respond, satisfied that another potential complication had been neutralized. Olivia might be angry, but she was also strategic enough to recognize a losing position when she found herself in one. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Lisa's car already parked by the curb. She was waiting on the front steps, holding a bottle of champagne and wearing an expression that mixed concern with celebration. I thought you might need company tonight, she explained as I approached. The news coverage is intensifying. They've connected the divorce filing to the SEC investigation, and they're digging into Robert's background, previous relationships, everything. I unlocked the door, disarming the security system with my fingerprint. Was that your doing? Lisa shook her head as we entered. This is pure journalistic feeding frenzy. Financial scandal plus personal betrayal equals ratings gold. They're running with it without any encouragement needed. In the kitchen, I gathered glasses while Lisa opened the champagne. The quiet domesticity of the moment contrasted sharply with the public storm surrounding Robert's downfall. Have you seen the footage? Lisa asked, pouring the champagne. Robert. Being escorted from the building? It's all over the business channels. I shook my head. I've been focused on Parkview matters. Lisa pulled out her tablet and navigated to a news site. The video played automatically. Robert emerged from the Meridian Technologies building, jacket collar turned up against the cameras, ignoring reporters' shouted questions as he hurried toward a waiting taxi. His face was ashen, his normally perfect appearance disheveled. The cardboard box in his arms contained framed photos, a trophy from some investment competition, and what appeared to be his prized collection of Mont Blanc pens. They're saying he's facing potential criminal charges, Lisa commented, accepting the glass I offered her. Securities fraud, wire fraud, possibly even RICO implications if they can prove he knew about the larger scheme. And his attorney, prospects? I asked. Dwindling by the hour. 4 more firms have declined to represent him since this morning. Apparently, no one wants to be associated with what they're calling the Meridian 6. I raised my glass in a small toast. To consequences. Lisa clinked her glass against mine. To meticulous planning. We settled in the living room, the house now fully reclaimed as my own space. Robert and Olivia's personal items were neatly packed and waiting in the foyer, a visual representation of their ejection from my life. Olivia called me on my way home, I mentioned casually. She attempted to threaten me with supposed financial information Robert shared with her. Lisa sat up straighter. That's concerning. What specifically? Nothing substantive, I assured her. A desperate attempt to gain leverage. I reminded her that fabricating allegations to regulatory agencies carries its own legal risks. Still, Lisa said, her legal mind already assessing potential threats. We should document the call. It could constitute attempted extortion, depending on the precise wording she used. I nodded in agreement. I'll have the car's call recording system download the audio file. Diane should have it for her records. As the evening progressed, we discussed next steps. The initial divorce hearing scheduled for the following week, the media strategy for addressing inevitable questions, the security measures still in place to prevent any unauthorized visits. From Robert. Around 8 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This isn't over. You have no idea what's coming. I showed the message to Lisa, who immediately took a screenshot. Documented threat. I'll forward it to Diane and the security team. He's desperate. His professional reputation destroyed. His personal life exposed. His financial resources dwindling, I observed. Desperation leads to mistakes, which is exactly what we anticipated. Lisa nodded. Each reckless action or threat simply strengthens your position. By the time Lisa left, we had refined the strategy for the coming days, maintaining my professional composure at Parkview, documenting any contact attempts from Robert or Olivia, proceeding methodically with the divorce filing while the Meridian investigation unfolded in parallel. Alone in my reclaimed house, I conducted one final walkthrough before retiring for the night. Every room now restored to my preferred order, every intrusion removed, every space reclaimed, the physical manifestation of the larger reclamation taking place in my life. As I prepared for bed, my phone buzzed with a final update from Diane. Court date confirmed for next Monday. Judge Harrington assigned as anticipated. R has secured representation from Morrison and Hayes. Final firm willing to take his case. Limited resources, questionable strategy. I responded with a simple acknowledgement, then set my phone aside. Everything continued to unfold according to plan. Robert scrambling to secure subpar legal representation, the divorce proceedings advancing on our preferred timeline, the media connecting all the unsavory elements of his professional and personal conduct. Tomorrow would bring new developments, new challenges to navigate. But tonight, I would sleep peacefully in my own bed, in my own home, secure in the knowledge that Robert's belated education about property deeds, financial independence, and the consequences of betrayal was proceeding exactly as designed. Morning arrived with new developments, some expected, some surprising in their timing, but not their substance. The first notification came from the security team. R attempted property access at 6:22 a.m., appeared intoxicated. Verbal confrontation with security personnel. Departed when police were mentioned. Full report and video forthcoming. The second was a news alert. Meridian Technologies CFO charged in federal probe. 5 others named as co-conspirators. Robert's name appeared third on the list of those charged. The third was from Diane. Emergency motion filed by R's new counsel requesting immediate access to marital property and assets. Hearing scheduled for 2 p.m. today. Your presence requested, but not required. Lisa called as I was reviewing these updates. Have you seen the morning news? They're calling it the biggest financial fraud case since Madoff. Robert's facing up to 25 years if convicted on all counts. I've seen it, I confirmed, already mentally adjusting my schedule to accommodate the unexpected court hearing. More pressing is his attorney's emergency motion this afternoon. Standard desperate tactic, Lisa assessed. They'll claim he needs access to marital property for documents relevant to his defense. Judge Harrington won't be sympathetic, especially given the property deed and his documented infidelity. I'll attend nonetheless, I decided. Better to appear reasonable and cooperative with the court, even as we maintain our position. The morning proceeded with careful coordination. rescheduling Parkview meetings, briefing Diane on the latest developments, reviewing security footage of Robert's early morning attempt to access the property. The video was particularly illuminating. Robert, clearly intoxicated, arguing with the security personnel stationed discreetly in an unmarked car near the property. His appearance was shocking, unshaven, wearing what appeared to be the same clothes from yesterday, his normally perfect hair disheveled. The transformation from polished investment executive to desperate, intoxicated trespasser had occurred in less than 24 hours. More telling was his behavior, the wild gesticulations, the finger-pointing. The visible rage. At one point, he actually attempted to push past the security officer, only backing down when informed that police would be called immediately if he took one more step toward the house. I forwarded the video to Diane with a note, additional evidence of erratic behavior for this afternoon's hearing. Her response was immediate. Perfect timing. We'll incorporate into our response to emergency motion. By 1:30 p.m., I was seated beside Diane in the county courthouse, reviewing our strategy for the emergency hearing. Robert had not yet arrived, though his newly retained counsel, a junior partner from Morrison & Hayes, was frantically organizing documents at the opposite table. They're going to argue he needs immediate access to financial records stored at the house, Diane explained quietly. Records supposedly crucial to his defense in the federal case. Records that don't exist, I noted. All our financial documentation is either with our accountant or in my secure cloud storage. Diane nodded. Exactly. But they're desperate for any foothold, any excuse to get him back into the house, where he might claim partial residence rights. At 1:52 p.m., Robert finally appeared, escorted by a different attorney than the one preparing at the defense table. This second lawyer appeared to be briefing him rapidly as they approached, likely explaining procedures and limitations. The transformation in Robert's appearance was stark, even from yesterday's news footage. His bespoke suit hung awkwardly, as if he'd lost weight overnight. Dark circles underlined his eyes, and his normally perfect grooming had given way to stubble and visible disarray. When he noticed me, he froze momentarily, his expression cycling rapidly through surprise, anger, and something approaching fear before settling into forced composure. The younger attorney guided him to their table, whispering urgently as Robert continued staring in my direction. I maintained a neutral expression, meeting his gaze briefly before returning my attention to the documents Diane was reviewing. The message was clear. I was composed, prepared, and completely unmoved by his presence. Judge Harrington entered precisely at 2:00 p.m., and the bailiff called the court to order. The proceedings began with Robert's counsel presenting their emergency motion, arguing that critical financial documents needed for his federal defense were located in the marital home, and that my sudden and unexplained reclaiming of the property constituted an attempt to withhold evidence relevant to his case. Diane listened patiently, making occasional notes, but otherwise displaying complete confidence in our position. When it was her turn to respond, she approached the bench with measured steps. Your Honor, we're prepared to address each claim individually, but first, let me clarify several fundamental misrepresentations in opposing counsel's motion. She proceeded to systematically dismantle their arguments, presenting the property deed showing my sole ownership, documentation of Robert's infidelity including his moving another woman into my house, evidence that all relevant financial records were either with our accountant or in secure digital storage accessible to both parties, and finally, the security footage from that morning showing Robert's intoxicated attempt to access the property. Far from withholding evidence, Diane concluded. My client has simply secured her legal property from unauthorized access after documented intrusion. Mr. Walker's professional difficulties are entirely separate from this divorce proceeding, though his attempts to conflate them suggest a concerning pattern of misrepresentation. Judge Harrington, known for her no-nonsense approach, addressed Robert's attorneys directly. Counselors, is there any evidence that documents exclusively related to Mr. Walker's federal case, not marital finances, not personal records, but specifically his defense against federal charges, are physically located in this property and nowhere else? The junior attorney glanced nervously at his senior colleague before responding. Your Honor, Mr. Walker believes certain documents and electronic records are stored there that would be beneficial to his defense. That wasn't my question, Judge Harrington noted dryly. I asked for evidence that crucial defense materials exist exclusively in that location. We don't have specific inventory, Your Honor, but— Motion denied, Judge Harrington interrupted. The property is clearly in Ms. Walker's name only. Mr. Walker's unauthorized use of it to house his paramour, followed by his documented intoxicated attempt to access it this morning, demonstrates precisely why supervised access is appropriate. She turned to Diane. Ms. Powell, your client has already arranged for the organized retrieval of Mr. Walker's personal belongings, correct? Yes. Your Honor? All personal items have been carefully packed and are available for supervised retrieval at scheduled times. Then that arrangement shall continue, Judge Harrington ruled. Mr. Walker may schedule supervised access to retrieve his belongings, but he may not reside in or freely access the property. Furthermore, this court will not entertain additional emergency motions without substantive new evidence. With a final bang of her gavel, the hearing concluded, a complete victory for our position. Robert sat stunned at the defense table while his attorneys whispered urgently, likely explaining the implications of the ruling and attempting to develop an alternative strategy. As Diane and I gathered our materials to leave, Robert suddenly stood and approached our table, ignoring his attorney's attempts to restrain him. Emily, he said, his voice pitched low but intense. We need to talk. This has gone far enough. You've made your point. Diane immediately stepped between us. Mr. Walker, all communication should be through counsel. I suggest you return to your attorneys. This is between me and my wife, Robert insisted, attempting to move around Diane. Ex-wife, I corrected him calmly, meeting his gaze directly. And Diane is right. We have nothing to discuss outside of legal proceedings. Something in Robert's expression shifted, the facade of control cracking to reveal the desperation beneath. You don't understand what you're doing, he hissed. The damage you're causing to me, to my career, to my life. I understand exactly what I'm doing, I replied, maintaining the same calm tone. Just as you understood exactly what you were doing when you moved your girlfriend into my house, when you depleted our joint accounts, when you lied about Meridian's activities. His face flushed with anger. You self-righteous— Mr. Walker, Judge Harrington's voice cut through the tension. She was still at the bench, observing the exchange. I strongly advise you to step away and allow Ms. Walker and her counsel to depart. Any further attempts at unauthorized communication will be noted in the court record. Robert's attorneys finally managed to pull him back, whispering urgently as they guided him toward the exit. The defeated slump of his shoulders contrasted sharply with his attempted intimidation moments earlier, a visual representation of his rapidly diminishing power. As Diane and I left the courthouse through a side entrance to avoid potential media, she remarked, "His behavior today only strengthens our case. Approaching you like that, attempting intimidation in front of the judge, it's the kind of impulsive action that destroys credibility." It's also predictable, I noted. Robert has always reacted poorly to losing control. The more pressure applied, the more erratic his behavior becomes. Which is exactly why your strategy has been so effective, Diane acknowledged. Each loss compounds the next, increasing his desperation, leading to further missteps. Back in my car, I checked my phone to find multiple updates waiting. The federal charges against Meridian Technologies had expanded to include potential criminal conspiracy. Robert's assets had been frozen as part of the investigation. And, most significantly, a reporter had uncovered Olivia's employment history at another firm previously investigated for similar violations. The narrative was evolving exactly as anticipated. Robert's professional conduct and personal betrayal merging into a single story of spectacular downfall. And I had orchestrated every aspect of it, from the timing of my disappearance to the reclaiming of my house, from the divorce filing to the court appearances. As I drove away from the courthouse, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. Robert had always underestimated me, my intelligence, my foresight, my capacity for strategic patience. Now he was learning the true cost of that miscalculation, one devastating revelation at a time. The next 2 weeks unfolded with the precision of a meticulously choreographed performance. Each day brought new developments in Robert's professional and personal collapse, while I maintained my carefully crafted equilibrium. By Thursday morning, 7 days after the initial court hearing, the Meridian Technologies scandal had expanded beyond anyone's initial projections. 4 senior executives had accepted plea deals in exchange for testimony against the others. The SEC had frozen all executive assets pending further investigation, and Robert's name appeared prominently in every article about the firm's fraudulent activities. "They're calling it a classic Ponzi scheme with a modern twist," Lisa explained during our weekly lunch. "Using client funds to cover trading losses, falsifying returns, creating shell accounts to hide the money flow. The federal prosecutor is comparing it to Madoff's operation, just on a smaller scale." I sipped my sparkling water. Absorbing this information with practiced composure. And Robert's specific involvement? According to the latest filings, he personally managed several of the fraudulent accounts. They have documentation showing he knew about the discrepancies for at least 16 months. Coincidentally, around the time he began his affair with Olivia. That timing wasn't coincidental, of course. Financial pressure and personal betrayal often moved in tandem, each feeding the other in a downward spiral of increasingly poor decisions. "Speaking of Olivia," Lisa continued, lowering her voice, though we were seated in a private corner of the restaurant. "Did you see this morning's business section? They've connected her to 3 different firms that faced regulatory action, always or as an executive assistant to a director later charged with financial improprieties, always departing just before investigations became public." I hadn't seen the article, but the pattern aligned with my own research into Olivia's employment history. "They're suggesting she was somehow involved in the schemes," Lisa shrugged. "Nothing that direct yet, but they're certainly implying she has a habit of forming relationships with executives engaged in questionable practices. Whether she's an accomplice or simply has terrible judgment in men remains unclear. The distinction wouldn't matter much for Olivia's future employment prospects. Association with multiple financial scandals effectively ended careers in the investment world, regardless of personal culpability. My phone buzzed with a text from Diane. "Ours attorney requesting settlement conference. Apparently federal counsel. Advised resolving divorce quickly to focus on criminal defense." This development was earlier than anticipated, but not unwelcome. Robert's legal resources were stretched thin between the criminal charges and divorce proceedings. Settling the latter would allow him to concentrate on the former, a practical decision his attorneys had likely been pushing for days. I responded, simply, "What terms are they proposing?" Diane's reply came moments later. "None yet, floating the concept only. Shall I schedule preliminary discussion?" After brief consideration, I texted back, "Proceed, but maintain all current positions on property and assets." The strategic advantages of a settlement were considerable. A negotiated agreement would avoid protracted court battles, prevent any unexpected judicial rulings, and most importantly, provide a clean, definitive end to my connection with Robert. The criminal proceedings against him might drag on for years, but our divorce could be finalized and behind me in a matter of weeks. Good news? Lisa asked, noting my slight smile. Potentially. Robert's counsel is requesting settlement discussions. Lisa raised an eyebrow. That was faster than we projected. His resources must be even more limited than we thought. The federal case takes precedence, I noted. His attorneys are likely advising him to simplify where possible. And will you agree to settlement talks? Of course. A clean resolution benefits me as much as him, provided the terms reflect reality. Reality being that I owned the house, outright, that my financial assets were properly segregated from his, and that his infidelity and financial misconduct had been thoroughly documented. Any reasonable settlement would acknowledge these facts rather than contest them. As lunch concluded, I received another text from Diane. Meeting scheduled for tomorrow. 10 Scows AMR will not attend personally. Counsel only. Perfect. Negotiating. With attorneys rather than Robert directly would keep emotions removed from the proceedings, allowing for more efficient resolution. The fact that Robert wouldn't be present suggested his lawyers had recognized his volatility as a liability in negotiations. The rest of the day proceeded according to my carefully maintained schedule. Parkview budget meetings, review of the emerging markets fund timelines, routine administrative tasks that anchored my professional identity regardless of personal circumstances. By evening, another significant development had emerged. The business press had uncovered connections between specific fraudulent accounts at Meridian Technologies and offshore entities linked to Robert personally. The implications were damning. Not just professional misconduct within the firm, but potential personal enrichment through deliberately deceptive practices. Diane called as I was reviewing these reports. Have you seen the latest? Just reading it now, I confirmed. This changes our settlement approach, she noted. If these offshore accounts are verified, they would constitute hidden assets subject to discovery in divorce proceedings. Unless we agree not to pursue them as part of a settlement, I pointed out. Diane paused, then chuckled softly. And this is why you're my favorite client. Yes, exactly. We now have additional leverage for tomorrow's discussion. How would you suggest we proceed? Let them make the initial offer, Diane advised. I suspect it will be surprisingly generous given these new revelations. They'll want to avoid any additional financial scrutiny from our forensic accountants, which could potentially uncover evidence relevant to the criminal case. The strategy was sound. By allowing Robert's counsel to establish initial terms, we would gain insight into what they were most concerned about protecting or concealing. That information itself had value beyond any specific dollar amount they might propose. The settlement conference the following morning validated this approach entirely. Robert's attorneys, now expanded to include a specialist in white-collar criminal defense, proposed terms that were indeed surprisingly favorable. They conceded full ownership of the house, which was already legally mine, acknowledged the separation of financial assets, and even offered a substantial cash settlement to expedite proceedings and provide closure for both parties. This last element was particularly telling. Robert had no legal obligation to provide additional funds beyond returning any marital assets he might have appropriated. A voluntary cash settlement suggested strongly that his legal team feared what further financial investigation might uncover. Diane received their proposal with professional neutrality, promising to review the terms with me and respond within 48 hours. As soon as we were alone in her office, however, Her poker face gave way to a satisfied smile. "They're terrified of financial discovery," she observed, highlighting specific clauses in the settlement agreement. These waivers of further accounting, the expedited timeline, the non-disclosure provisions, all designed to prevent our forensic accountants from examining his finances further. I reviewed the document carefully, noting the generous terms alongside the restrictive clauses. The cash settlement is significantly higher than we anticipated. "Blood money," Diane said bluntly. "They're hoping you'll take it and walk away without asking questions about where it came from or what else might be hidden. And if we countered by demanding full financial disclosure instead of accepting the settlement?" Diane leaned back in her chair, considering. "It would delay the divorce proceedings, potentially by months. Any information we uncovered would likely be shared with federal prosecutors through discovery requirements. Robert's criminal exposure would increase significantly." I weighed these options carefully. The settlement offered immediate closure and substantial financial compensation. Further investigation promised potential satisfaction in seeing Robert face additional consequences, but at the cost of prolonging my own connection to him and his misdeeds. Draft a counteroffer, I decided. Accept the general framework, but increase the settlement amount by 30%. Add provisions for retrieval of any remaining personal items from the house, and include strict non-contact requirements going forward. Diane nodded approvingly. They'll accept. The additional amount is significant, but not prohibitive, and the non-contact provisions benefit Robert as much as you at this point. She was right. By that evening, Robert's counsel had agreed to our counter-offer with minimal negotiation. The final settlement included the increased financial compensation, comprehensive non-contact provisions, and an expedited timeline for finalizing all documentation. The divorce would be complete within 10 days, assuming the judge approved the settlement terms, which Diane assured me was virtually certain given the circumstances and Judge Harrington's previous rulings. As I left Diane's office that evening, a notification appeared on my phone, a news alert with Robert's name in the headline, "Meridian Technologies executive released on $5 million bail, passport surrendered." The attached article included a courthouse photograph of Robert leaving his bail hearing. The transformation was shocking, even to me. In just 2 weeks, he had aged a decade. The polished, confident investment director had been replaced by a haggard, defeated figure in an ill-fitting suit. Photographers captured him shielding his face from cameras, shoulders hunched, escorted by grim-faced attorneys on either side. Most telling was the complete absence of Olivia in any recent coverage. According to Lisa's sources, she had left the city 4 days ago, her destination unknown. Whether she had abandoned Robert to his fate or been advised to distance herself from the case remained unclear. Either way, his personal and professional support systems had evaporated simultaneously. The following week passed in a blur of paperwork, signatures, and final arrangements. The divorce settlement was submitted to the court, reviewed by Judge Harrington, and approved with remarkable efficiency. Robert's attorneys pushed for immediate processing, likely under instruction to resolve the divorce before additional criminal charges might complicate matters further. On a crisp Tuesday morning, Diane called with the news I had been waiting for. "It's done," she said simply. "The judge signed the final decree this morning. You are officially divorced." The words landed with surprising gentleness, not the dramatic climax one might expect after months of strategic planning, but rather the quiet conclusion of a necessary business transaction. "Thank you," I said simply, "for everything." "My pleasure," Diane replied, professional but warm. "The final settlement has been transferred to your account. The deed to the house has been re-registered with additional notations confirming sole ownership. All legal notifications have been sent to relevant parties, and the non-contact provisions are in full effect immediately. Any attempt by Robert to contact you directly would constitute violation of a court order, potentially resulting in additional legal consequences. Another loose end neatly tied. Robert would not be appearing on my doorstep or calling my phone in desperate attempts to negotiate or manipulate. The legal barriers were now as firm as the emotional ones I had constructed months ago. That evening, Lisa arrived at my house with an expensive bottle of champagne and a small, elegantly wrapped package. To commemorate the occasion, she explained as I welcomed her inside. We settled in the living room, now redecorated to my personal preferences rather than the compromise style that had characterized my marriage to Robert. The new furniture, artwork, and color scheme reflected my aesthetic completely. No concessions, no accommodations for anyone else's taste. Lisa raised her glass in a toast. To new beginnings, clean breaks, and bulletproof property deeds. I smiled, clinking my glass against hers. And to thorough preparation. Open your gift, she urged after we had each sipped the excellent champagne. The small package contained a beautiful silver paperweight, elegantly engraved with a single word, prevail. It seemed fitting, Lisa explained. Not just surviving, but prevailing, coming through stronger than before. I turned the paperweight in my hand, appreciating both the sentiment and the craftsmanship. It's perfect, thank you. As we enjoyed the champagne, Lisa updated me on the latest developments in Robert's case. 4 more executives had accepted plea deals, each implicating him in increasingly serious violations. His bail conditions had been tightened after prosecutors expressed concern about potential flight risk, and the offshore accounts connected to him were now under scrutiny by international financial crime units. They're projecting a minimum 8-year sentence if he's convicted on all counts, Lisa noted. Possibly more, depending on what the offshore investigations uncover. I absorbed this information with the same cool detachment I'd maintained throughout the process. Robert's fate was no longer connected to mine in any way. His choices had led him to this point, just as my choices had led me to mine. And professionally? Lisa asked, changing the subject. The Parkview board remains supportive. More than supportive, I confirmed. The Emerging Markets Fund is proceeding ahead of schedule. My quarterly performance review was exemplary, and Blackwell has hinted at potential advancement opportunities in the coming year. My professional success continued uninterrupted, perhaps even enhanced by the contrast between my composed handling of personal challenges and Robert's spectacular implosion. Where his career lay in ruins, mine continued its steady upward trajectory, built on the solid foundation of competence rather than deception. After Lisa departed, I moved through my reclaimed home with a sense of peaceful completion. Each room now reflected only my preferences, my choices, my vision. No traces of Robert remained. All his belongings had been removed, all evidence of his temporary occupation erased. In my home office, I opened the secure file I had maintained throughout this process, a detailed documentation of Robert's betrayal, my strategic response, and the ultimate resolution. The final entry would be, "Made tonight," closing this chapter permanently. As I typed the concluding notes, a news alert appeared on my computer screen. Federal prosecutors expand Meridian Technologies case. New evidence suggests international money laundering. Robert's world continued to collapse, the consequences of his actions multiplying beyond even my careful projections. But that story was no longer connected to mine. I had extricated myself completely, protecting what was mine while allowing him to face the natural repercussions of his choices. I completed my final entry, saved the file, and closed the document. Then I activated the secure deletion protocol we had established months ago. systematically removing all traces of my documentation from any potentially discoverable source. The record of my strategy existed now only in encrypted backups accessible solely to me, insurance against any future attempts to rewrite this history. The following morning, I awoke with a sense of lightness I hadn't experienced in years. The weight of Robert's betrayal, the burden of strategic planning, the constant vigilance required to maintain my facade of ignorance, all of it had been shed. What remained was the clean slate I had fought so methodically to secure. I moved through my morning routine with unhurried precision, savoring the small rituals that had once been rushed to accommodate Robert's schedule. The house felt different, not just because of the redecorating, but because the energy had shifted. The tension that had permeated these rooms during the final years of our marriage had dissipated, replaced by a calm that reflected my internal state. As I prepared for work, my phone rang. Not Robert or Diane or Lisa, but Jordan Blackwell, the Parkview board chairman. "Emily," he greeted me warmly. "I hope I'm not calling too early." "Not at all, Jordan. What can I do for you?" "I wanted to speak with you before this morning's executive committee meeting," he said. "As you know, Catherine Mitchell announced her retirement as COO last month. The board has been conducting a search for her replacement." I was well aware. Catherine's impending departure had been a topic of speculation throughout Parkview for weeks. "We've interviewed several external candidates," Jordan continued, "but the board feels strongly that promoting from within would better serve Parkview's culture and strategic vision. I'm calling to ask if you would consider accepting the position." I paused, momentarily caught off guard. The Chief Operating Officer role would represent a significant advancement and a substantial increase in both responsibility and compensation. "I'm flattered, Jordan," I replied carefully. "It's not a move I had anticipated at this stage." "I understand this comes somewhat out of sequence in the typical career progression," he acknowledged. "But your handling of the Emerging Markets Fund, coupled with your demonstrated ability to manage complex situations with remarkable composure, has impressed the entire board. We believe you're ready for this challenge." By complex situations, I knew he was delicately referencing my divorce and the public spectacle surrounding Robert's downfall. The professional world had noticed not just what had happened, but how I had navigated it. "I'd like to discuss the details more thoroughly, of course," I said. "But yes, I would certainly consider the opportunity." "Excellent," Jordan sounded, genuinely pleased. "I'll have Karen send over the formal offer package today. We can discuss specifics at your convenience, but the board hopes to announce the appointment by month end." After we disconnected, I sat at my kitchen island, contemplating this unexpected development. The COO position hadn't been on my immediate horizon. I had been methodically building toward a chief investment officer role, perhaps in another year or two. This represented an acceleration of my professional timeline and a slight pivot in my career trajectory. The timing was perfect, though I couldn't have planned it. As one chapter conclusively ended, another was opening with even greater potential. My phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. "In case you haven't heard, I've left the country. Didn't want to leave any loose ends. Oh, Olivia." I stared at the message, surprised not by her departure but by her contacting me. I had assumed she would simply vanish into whatever life she had arranged for herself post-Robert. This felt like a peculiar form of closure, or perhaps a final attempt to assert some control over the narrative. I considered my response carefully before typing, "I wish you well, Olivia. Some lessons are expensive, but valuable." Then I blocked the number. Lisa called just as I was leaving for work. "Have you seen the news? Olivia's apparently fled to Singapore. The federal prosecutor issued a statement saying they're considering charging her as a co-conspirator based on new evidence." "Singapore has an extradition treaty with the United States," I noted, locking my front door. "Exactly. Not the smartest move if she's actually trying to evade federal charges." Lisa paused, though the prosecutor's statement might be strategy, trying to pressure her to return voluntarily and testify against bigger targets. Either way, it's no longer my concern, I said, settling into my car. Speaking of concerns, Lisa's tone shifted. I just got a very interesting call from the executive. Search firm Parkview retains. They were doing a reference check on you for the COO position. I smiled. Jordan called this morning with a preliminary offer. That's fantastic, Emily. Lisa's excitement was genuine. Though I'm not surprised. The board has been impressed with your handling of everything, professionally and personally. It's an unexpected direction, I admitted, but one with considerable potential. It's the perfect next step, Lisa insisted, and the timing couldn't be better. As I drove to Parkview for what would be my final day as chief investment strategist, I reflected on the path that had led me here. 12 years ago, I had married Robert believing we were building something together, a partnership of equals, a shared future shaped by mutual respect and common goals. The reality had proven quite different. Robert had seen me as an accessory to his success rather than an architect of our joint achievements. He had taken my support, my financial acumen, my stability for granted, never recognizing that these were the very foundations upon which his illusory success had been built. His betrayal had forced me to recalibrate, not just my personal life, but my understanding of my own capabilities. The methodical dismantling of our marriage had revealed strengths I hadn't fully acknowledged, skills I hadn't fully utilized, a capacity for strategic thinking that extended far beyond portfolio management. In a way, I owed Robert a debt of gratitude. His infidelity had liberated me from a marriage that had become constraining, from a role that had become limiting. The very qualities he had underestimated in me, my patience, my thoroughness, my attention to detail, had ultimately secured my freedom and accelerated my success. At the Parkview offices, a subtle shift was already perceptible. Colleagues greeted me with slightly different deference. Administrative staff were marginally more attentive. Word of my likely promotion had spread through the efficient grapevine of corporate communications. By afternoon, the formal offer had been delivered, a comprehensive package that exceeded my expectations in terms of compensation, equity, and autonomy. As I reviewed the documents in my office, Jordan appeared in my doorway. "May I come in?" he asked, though we both knew the question was mere courtesy. "Of course," I gestured to the chairs across from my desk. I was just reviewing the offer. Jordan settled into the chair with the comfortable authority of someone accustomed to making consequential decisions. "And your initial impressions?" "It's very generous," I acknowledged. "The equity structure particularly. The board believes in aligning executive incentives with long-term performance," he said, then added with a faint smile. "Something your ex-husband's firm might have benefited from implementing." The reference to Robert was deliberate, not cruel, but pointed. Jordan was signaling that Parkview was fully aware of the contrast between my conduct and Robert's, and that this awareness had factored into their decision. "I appreciate the confidence the board is placing in me," I said, deliberately steering the conversation back to professional territory. "The timeline for transition seems ambitious." "Catherine is eager to begin her retirement," Jordan explained, "and the board feels delaying the announcement would create unnecessary speculation. We'd prefer to move forward decisively." "I understand, and I agree." I closed the folder containing the offer documents. "I'll review the details thoroughly this evening, but barring any unforeseen concerns, I'm prepared to accept." "Excellent." Jordan's satisfaction was evident. "We'll announce internally tomorrow and to the markets next week. The PR team will want to coordinate with you on the public narrative." The public narrative, corporate speak for how my promotion would be positioned to clients, competitors, and the financial press. We both recognized that my recent divorce and Robert's legal troubles would inevitably color the coverage, regardless of how clinically the announcement was crafted. "I'll make myself available," I assured him. After Jordan departed, I stood at my office window, gazing out at the skyline of Lakeside Heights. The financial district stretched before me, a landscape of glass towers and corporate ambition. Somewhere in that vista was the Meridian Technologies building, where Robert had built his career on shifting sands, never realizing the true foundation was crumbling beneath him. My phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "Dinner tonight to celebrate. The new COO?" I smiled and replied, "Absolutely. Vincenzo's at 8? The symmetry wasn't lost on me. Vincenzo's had been where Lisa and I had strategized during the early phases of my plan. Now it would be where we celebrated its successful conclusion and the beginning of a new chapter. The remainder of the day passed in a blur of meetings and congratulatory conversations as word of my impending promotion circulated. By late afternoon, the office was buzzing with speculation about the structural changes that might accompany my ascension to the C-suite. I maintained my usual composed demeanor, neither confirming nor denying the rumors, focusing instead on the immediate tasks that required completion before my transition. The professional discipline that had served me so well throughout my personal crisis continued to be my most valuable asset. As I was preparing to leave for the day, my assistant delivered a small package that had arrived by courier. "It's been through security," she assured me, though they said there's nothing inside but paper. I thanked her and waited until she had left before opening the package. Inside was a single sheet of expensive stationery bearing a handwritten note in Robert's distinctive scrawl. "Emily, I underestimated you. That is now painfully clear. Whatever comes next in my situation, I wanted you to know that I recognize the architect of my undoing. With a strange sort of respect, Robert." I studied the note, surprised not by the sentiment, but by Robert's decision to express it. This wasn't a plea for reconciliation or an attempt at manipulation. He knew those bridges were irreparably burned. It was, perhaps, the closest thing to honest acknowledgement he was capable of offering. I folded the note carefully and placed it in my desk drawer, neither treasured nor discarded. A small artifact from a closed chapter, significant only as confirmation of a lesson learned at considerable cost. To him, not to me. 1 year later, I stood at the window of my executive office on the top floor of the Parkview Financial Headquarters, gazing out at the city skyline as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the financial district. My first year as Chief Operating Officer had unfolded with remarkable success. Our emerging markets fund had outperformed projections by 17%, we'd acquired a promising boutique wealth management firm, and our client retention rate had reached an all-time high. The morning's business news had included a small item about Robert's sentencing: 12 years in federal prison, forfeiture of all assets, and restitution payments that would extend well beyond his release. Olivia had reportedly testified against him as part of her own immunity agreement, revealing that their relationship had begun not as a romantic connection, but as a strategic partnership to conceal financial misconduct. I felt no satisfaction in this news, no vindictive pleasure in Robert's downfall. Those emotions had burned away long ago, replaced by the cool clarity that had guided me through each phase of my response to his betrayal. What remained was simply recognition of natural consequences. His actions had produced precisely the results that should have been expected. My assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Ms. Walker, the investment committee for the new healthcare fund is assembled in the main conference room." "Thank you, Jennifer. I'll be right there." I gathered my presentation materials and took one last look at the view from my window. The city spread out below, opportunities extending in every direction. My house remained my sanctuary, my career continued its ascent, and my life proceeded on the path I had carefully constructed. Robert had moved his girlfriend into my house, never bothering to read the deed that would have revealed his vulnerability. That single act of carelessness, born of arrogance, entitlement, and underestimation, had set in motion the complete dismantling of his carefully constructed facade. I closed my office door and headed toward the conference room, my steps measured and confident. The past was properly archived, its lessons incorporated, but its hold released. Ahead lay possibilities limited only by my vision and determination. A future built on the solid foundation of knowing exactly what I owned, what I was worth, and what I was capable of achieving. Robert had learned those facts too late. I had known them all along. Walking into the conference room, I felt a familiar surge of focused energy. The investment committee members rose as I entered, a gesture of respect I had earned through consistent performance and strategic leadership. Among them were two new faces, promising talents I had personally recruited from competing firms. "Good afternoon," I began, setting my materials on the polished conference table. "Thank you all for making time for this discussion. Today we're finalizing our approach to the Healthcare Innovation Fund, a $350 million initiative that will position Parkview at the forefront of one of the decade's most transformative sectors." The presentation flowed seamlessly, the culmination of months of research, analysis, and careful planning. As I outlined our investment strategy, I observed the committee members' responses, noting who grasped the more subtle aspects of our approach and who required additional context. The ability to read people, to anticipate their reactions and address their concerns before they fully formed, had always been one of my strengths, though I now employed it with greater intentionality. The risk mitigation framework detailed on page 17 is particularly innovative, noted Marcus Chen, our recently appointed head of research. This balanced approach to regulatory uncertainty should reassure institutional investors who've been hesitant to enter the space. That's precisely the intention, I acknowledged. We're creating a vehicle that offers exposure to high-growth areas while providing downside protection against the inevitable regulatory adjustments. It's the equilibrium our clients are seeking. The meeting progressed with efficient thoroughness, each aspect of the proposal examined and refined. By the conclusion, we had unanimous approval to move forward, with a launch date set for the following quarter. As the committee members dispersed, Jordan Blackwell remained behind, waiting until we were alone before speaking. "The board is extremely pleased with your performance this past year, Emily," he said, his tone reflecting the comfortable relationship we'd developed since my promotion. "The transition from investment strategy to overall operations has been remarkably smooth, smoother than any of us anticipated, to be honest." "Thank you, Jordan. The learning curve was steep, but navigating it has been immensely satisfying." He nodded, then added with careful casualness, "We've been approached by Withdrew Capital about a potential merger. Preliminary discussions only, but their interest appears genuine." Withdrew Capital, a prestigious firm with a century-long history and a client list that included some of the wealthiest families in the country. A merger would transform Parkview's market position overnight. "That's unexpected," I replied, processing the implications. "Their corporate culture is traditionally quite conservative." "It is," Jordan agreed, "which is why their interest in us, and specifically in your leadership approach, is all the more significant. Their CEO mentioned your handling of the healthcare fund presentation at last month's industry conference as particularly impressive." I recalled the conference, a gathering of top-tier financial executives where I had presented our healthcare investment thesis to a somewhat skeptical audience. The presentation had generated considerable positive attention, but I hadn't realized Winthrop's leadership had taken specific notice. "The board hasn't formed a position yet," Jordan continued. "We wanted to gauge your initial thoughts before proceeding further." This was more than professional courtesy. It was recognition that my perspective would significantly influence the board's decision, a level of deference that reflected my enhanced standing within the organization. "I'd want to examine their client retention metrics and back office integration potential before forming a definitive opinion," I said. "But conceptually, there could be substantial synergies, particularly in their private wealth division complementing our institutional strengths." Jordan smiled. "Always the thorough analyst. I'll arrange for the confidential data room to be set up next week. You can assemble whatever team you need for the assessment." After he departed, I remained in the conference room momentarily, contemplating this new development. A year ago, I had been focused on extrication, removing myself from a corrupted relationship while preserving what was rightfully mine. Now I was contemplating integration, the strategic combination of two powerful entities into something potentially greater than the sum of their parts. The symmetry was not lost on me. My phone vibrated with a text from Lisa. "Dinner tonight? Have news." I smiled. Despite Lisa's promotion to general counsel 6 months ago, our regular dinners had remained a constant, a space for unfiltered conversation and genuine connection in lives increasingly dominated by corporate responsibilities. "Vincenzo's at 8?" I replied. "Perfect. Table in the back?" "Reserved already." Returning to my office, I found a small package waiting on my desk with a note from Jennifer. This arrived by courier. Security cleared it. The package bore no return address, but the handwriting was instantly familiar. Olivia's distinctive script, with its precise angles and deliberate flourishes. I considered returning it unopened, but curiosity prevailed. Inside was a slim volume. The Art of Strategy by a renowned business philosopher, and a brief note. "Thought you might appreciate this. Consider it acknowledgement of a masterclass. Singapore is lovely this time of year. Oh." I examined the book, noting several passages. Had been discreetly marked with pencil. Each highlighted section addressed the principles of strategic patience and the value of allowing opponents to reveal their vulnerabilities through their own actions. The message was clear. Olivia was acknowledging my strategic acumen while subtly informing me of her comfortable exile. Her immunity deal had evidently allowed her to retain enough assets to establish herself abroad, beyond the reach of professional repercussions, if not legal ones. I placed the book on my shelf without reading further. Olivia Chen had become a footnote in my story, an unintended catalyst for necessary change, rather than a continuing presence of any significance. The afternoon proceeded with its typical rhythm of meetings, calls, and strategic decisions. At 5:30, I began preparing to depart for the day, organizing materials for tomorrow's sessions and reviewing the priority items on my calendar. As I was gathering my things, Jordan reappeared at my door. "One more thing I forgot to mention earlier. The Jameson Foundation is looking for a new trustee for their financial literacy initiative. They specifically asked if you might be interested." The Jameson Foundation, one of the most prestigious philanthropic organizations in the city, with a focus on education and economic empowerment. A trustee position would represent significant social capital and meaningful community influence. "I'm honored they would consider me," I replied. "Please let them know I'd be happy to discuss the opportunity." "I thought you might be," Jordan smiled. "Catherine Jameson was quite insistent that you were exactly what they needed. Someone who understands both the technical aspects of finance and the human elements of economic security." After Jordan left, I sat at my desk for a moment, reflecting. on the unexpected opportunities that continued to emerge. The professional reputation I had carefully built over years had been enhanced rather than damaged by the public dissolution of my marriage. Where some might have seen vulnerability or instability, the business community had recognized resilience and strategic discipline. The contrast with Robert's trajectory could not have been more stark. While his reputation had been permanently destroyed, mine had strengthened. While his freedom had been forfeit to his choices, mine had expanded through mine. Arriving at Vincenzo's precisely at 8, I found Lisa already seated at our usual table in the rear corner of the restaurant, a location that offered both privacy and a clear view of the entire dining room. "You look particularly pleased with yourself," she observed as I sat down. "Good day?" "Interesting day," I corrected, accepting the glass of Barolo the waiter had brought without being asked. Our preferences were well established at this point. Winthrop Capital has approached Parkview about a potential merger. Lisa's eyebrows rose. "That would be significant? Are you considering it seriously?" "I'm considering all aspects. Seriously, as always." I smiled. The initial figures are compelling, but corporate culture integration is the real challenge with these combinations. "And how does Jordan feel about it?" "He's deferring substantially to my assessment, which is telling in itself." Lisa nodded, understanding the subtext. "Your influence has expanded considerably this year." "As has yours," I noted. "Which brings me to the question, what news do you have?" Lisa's expression shifted to one of contained excitement. "I've been approached about a general counsel position at Ellison Healthcare. They're expanding aggressively and need someone with both legal and financial sector experience to navigate the regulatory landscape." Ellison Healthcare, one of the largest hospital management companies in the country, with a reputation for innovation and growth. The move would represent a significant advancement for Lisa, though it would mean leaving Parkview after nearly a decade. "That's a remarkable opportunity," I said sincerely, though I assume accepting would create certain complexities. Lisa understood my meaning immediately. For the past 6 months, she had been dating Jordan Blackwell, a relationship that had begun unexpectedly at a charity event and developed into something increasingly serious. "That's part of what I wanted to discuss," she admitted. "The position is in their Chicago office. Jordan and I have been talking about what that might mean for us." "And what conclusions have you reached?" "None definitive yet, but he's mentioned that Parkview has been considering opening a Midwest regional office and that the timing might be serendipitous." I smiled at this revelation. Jordan had indeed raised the possibility of a Chicago presence in recent strategic planning sessions, though he had presented it as a long-term consideration rather than an immediate priority. Interesting how personal and professional considerations can align when properly managed, I observed. "I learned from the best," Lisa replied, raising her glass in a small salute. "Speaking of which, I saw the news about Robert's sentencing this morning." 12 years, with potential reduction for cooperation, I confirmed. Though given the extent of the financial fraud, I doubt he'll serve less than 8. "Does it feel like closure?" Lisa asked, her tone shifting to one of genuine curiosity rather than professional analysis. I considered the question carefully before responding. Closure implies there was something still open. For me, that chapter ended the moment the divorce was finalized. Robert's legal consequences are entirely separate from my narrative, a parallel story that no longer intersects with mine. "That's remarkably healthy," Lisa noted, studying me over the rim of her glass. "Most people would feel something more visceral, satisfaction, vindication, even pity." "I felt those things," I acknowledged, but I processed them and moved forward. Lingering in emotional reactions to Robert's circumstances would be giving him influence over my present that he hasn't earned. Our conversation shifted to other topics as dinner progressed. The healthcare fund launch, Lisa's potential relocation, mutual friends, and cultural events. The easy flow between professional subjects and personal matters reflected the balanced integration I had established in my post-Robert life, where career advancement and personal fulfillment existed in harmony rather than competition. As dessert arrived, a shared tiramisu that had become something of a tradition, Lisa asked, "Do you ever think about dating again? It's been a year." The question didn't surprise me. Lisa had delicately raised the subject before, always careful to respect my boundaries while expressing gentle concern about my self-imposed solitude. "I've considered it," I replied honestly, "but I haven't felt any particular urgency. My relationship with Robert consumed 12 years of my life. I'm enjoying this space to focus entirely on my own priorities." "I understand that," Lisa said, "though I hope you know that not all relationships require the kind of strategic vigilance you needed with Robert. Some can actually be restful." I smiled at her characterization. "Says the woman dating my board chairman," Lisa laughed. "Point taken. Though to be fair, Jordan is refreshingly straightforward compared to the corporate attorneys I usually deal with." "I don't doubt it," I conceded, "and I'm not opposed to the concept of partnership. I'm simply selective about what energy I invest and where. Right now, my professional momentum is providing substantial fulfillment." "Fair enough," Lisa nodded. "I just don't want you to miss opportunities for connection because you're still operating in strategic defense mode." Her observation was perceptive, perhaps more than she realized. The methodical approach I had employed to extricate myself from my marriage had indeed become somewhat habitual, a lens through which I assessed all potential involvements. While effective for professional advancement, it created a certain emotional distance in personal interactions. "I'll keep that in mind," I promised, recognizing the genuine concern behind her comment. "But for now, my focus remains on the Withdrew, merger assessment, and the healthcare fund launch. Romance can wait." After dinner, we parted with our usual warmth, a brief embrace and promises to connect later in the week. As I drove home through the quiet evening streets, I reflected on our conversation and the parallel paths our lives had taken over the past year. Lisa had found unexpected happiness while advancing professionally. I had achieved remarkable career success while maintaining my independence. Arriving home, I disarmed the security system and moved through the familiar rooms of my house, now completely transformed from the space Robert and I had shared. New furniture, new artwork, new color palette, nothing remained to trigger memories of our life together. The renovation had been therapeutic as well as aesthetic, a physical manifestation of my internal reset. In my home office, I settled at my desk to review the preliminary Withdrew capital documents Jordan had sent over. The proposed merger would require meticulous evaluation, financial projections to verify, corporate cultures to assess, strategic alignments to consider. The complexity of the analysis was precisely the kind of intellectual challenge I found most engaging. As I worked, I noticed the silver paperweight Lisa had given me when my divorce was finalized. Prevail, still catching. The light from my desk lamp. The word had become something of a personal mantra, a reminder not just of what I had overcome, but of the standard to which I held myself in all endeavors. My phone chimed with a text message from an unfamiliar number. "Ms. Walker, this is Catherine Jameson. Jordan gave me your number." "Would you be available for breakfast next Tuesday to discuss the foundation trustee position? The garden room at the Peninsula, perhaps?" The directness was characteristic of Catherine Jameson's reputation, a woman who had transformed her family's traditional philanthropy into a dynamic force for economic education among underserved communities. Her interest in my involvement was flattering and aligned well with my growing desire to extend my influence beyond the purely financial sector. I responded affirmatively and added the meeting to my calendar. Then I returned to the Withdrew analysis, working steadily until well past midnight, absorbed in the intricate details of what might become my next major professional achievement. The following morning, I woke early for my regular swim, 50 laps in the pool at the Lakeside Athletic Club, a ritual that cleared my mind and energized my body for the day ahead. As I moved through the water with practiced efficiency, I considered the various opportunities now converging in my life: the Winthrop merger, the healthcare fund, the Jameson Foundation trustee position. Each represented a different facet of influence, a different avenue for applying my capabilities. After showering and changing into a tailored charcoal suit that projected quiet authority, I drove to Parkview's headquarters, arriving precisely at 7:30, early enough to review materials before the day's meetings began, but not so early as to appear overly eager or insecure. Jennifer was already at her desk when I arrived, a cup of my preferred tea waiting. "Good morning, Ms. Walker. The data room for the Winthrop assessment is ready, and I've assembled the team you requested. They'll be available starting at 9. "Thank you, Jennifer. Any other updates I should be aware of?" "Yes, the financial press has picked up rumors of the Winthrop discussions. Jordan asked if you'd join a call with investor relations at 8 to coordinate messaging." This development wasn't entirely unexpected. Financial institutions operated in an environment of constant scrutiny, and significant moves rarely remained confidential for long. "Of course. Please let him know I'll be ready." As I settled at my desk, I noticed a small news alert on my tablet. Former Meridian Technologies executive begins prison sentence. The article included a file photo of Robert from his days of corporate prominence, looking confident and composed, a stark contrast to the haggard figure who had entered the federal prison system that morning. I closed the alert without reading. Further, Robert's story was no longer of professional or personal relevance, merely a diminishing echo from a chapter already concluded. The investor relations call went smoothly, with Jordan and I presenting a united message of exploring strategic opportunities without confirming the specific discussions with Winthrop. The deliberate ambiguity was standard practice, acknowledging enough to prevent wild speculation while preserving negotiating flexibility. At 9, I joined the Winthrop assessment team in the secure data room we had established, a windowless conference room equipped with specialized workstations for analyzing the confidential materials Winthrop had provided. The team included our top analysts, legal counsel, and integration specialists, each focused on evaluating specific aspects of the potential merger. "I want comprehensive analysis, not just financial projections," I instructed the group. Winthrop's client relationship, models, their compensation structures, their compliance history, everything that would impact cultural integration. We're not just acquiring assets, we'd be combining organizational DNAs. The team understood my expectations. Over the past year, I had established a reputation for thorough due diligence and strategic patience, never rushing decisions based on surface-level attractiveness, always exploring the deeper implications and potential complications. By mid-afternoon, preliminary findings were beginning to emerge. Winthrop's financial position was even stronger than publicly reported, with substantial cash reserves and an impressive client retention rate. Their investment performance was solid if somewhat conservative, and their compliance record was impeccable. However, certain cultural elements raised potential concerns. A hierarchical management structure that contrasted with Parkview's more collaborative approach. Compensation models heavily weighted toward individual rather than team performance, and a traditional client service model that might clash with our more technology-driven methodologies. These aren't insurmountable obstacles, I noted as we reviewed the findings, but they would require deliberate management during integration. I want scenario planning for how we would address these differences, specific strategies, not just acknowledgement of the challenges. As the team dispersed to continue their analysis, I received a text from Jordan. Catherine Jameson called, extremely positive about your potential involvement with the foundation. She mentioned the possibility of you chairing their new financial empowerment initiative. The message brought a small smile to my face. Catherine Jameson was known for her decisiveness. Once she identified someone she wanted involved in her projects, she moved swiftly to secure their commitment. The chair position would be more involved than a standard trustee role, but also more influential in shaping the foundation's direction. I responded to Jordan. Interesting development. Meeting with her Tuesday for breakfast. We'll keep you informed. The remainder of the day unfolded with its usual rhythm of decisions, meetings, and strategic adjustments. At 6, I gathered my materials to depart, informing Jennifer I would continue reviewing the Withdrew analysis from home. Also, I added, please schedule a lunch meeting with Marcus Chen for tomorrow. I want his perspective on how Withdrew's research methodologies would integrate with ours. Already on your calendar for noon, Jennifer confirmed, at the grill, as usual. As I drove home through the early evening traffic, I reflected on the day's developments and the steady expansion of my professional influence. In just 1 year, as COO, I had transformed from a highly respected investment strategist to a pivotal decision-maker whose judgment would determine the future direction of a major financial institution. The contrast with where I had been a year earlier was striking. Then, I had been focused on extracting myself from a corrupted marriage while preserving my assets and reputation. Now, I was evaluating the acquisition of a century-old financial institution and being courted for leadership roles in prestigious philanthropic organizations. The journey from one point to the other had not been accidental. Each step had been deliberately taken, each opportunity carefully evaluated, each relationship strategically cultivated. The same methodical approach that had guided my extrication from Robert's deception now directed my professional ascent, not with cold calculation, but with clear-eyed assessment of value and potential. Arriving home, I changed into more comfortable attire and prepared a light dinner before settling in my home office with the Withdrew materials. The detailed analysis of their operations revealed an organization with impressive capabilities, but certain structural rigidities that would require careful management in any integration. As I made notes on potential approaches, my phone rang with an unlisted number. Normally, I would let such calls go to voicemail, but something prompted me to answer. Emily Walker speaking. Ms. Walker, this is Warden Phillips from the Federal Correctional Institution. I apologize for contacting you directly, but you're listed as the emergency contact for inmate Robert Walker. I paused, surprised by this information. There must be some mistake. I'm Mr. Walker's ex-wife. Our divorce was finalized over a year ago. I understand, ma'am, but you remain the only contact in his file. Mr. Walker was involved in an incident this afternoon. He's currently in the medical unit with non-life-threatening injuries. I see, I replied, my voice neutral. While I appreciate being informed, I'm no longer in a position to make decisions regarding Mr. Walker's care. I'd suggest contacting his attorney at Morrison & Hayes. We'll do that, ma'am. Again, I apologize for the disruption. After the call ended, I sat motionless for a moment, processing this unexpected intrusion from the past. Robert had maintained me as his emergency contact despite our divorce and everything that had transpired, either from oversight or, more likely, because he had no one else to list. The realization brought no satisfaction, no vindication, merely a distant acknowledgement of how completely Robert's support network had collapsed. His colleagues had distanced themselves once the fraud was exposed. His friends had evaporated when his social standing dissolved. Even Olivia had ultimately testified against him to secure her own freedom. In the end, the only person he could list as someone to call in an emergency was the very woman whose life he had attempted to appropriate, whose trust he had betrayed, whose intelligence he had underestimated. There was a certain symmetry to it, a final confirmation of the fundamental miscalculation that had defined his approach to our marriage. He had never truly seen me, never fully grasped my capabilities or respected my autonomy. That blindness had cost him everything, while my clear vision had preserved and expanded what was mine. I closed the Withdrew file and moved to the living room windows, gazing out at the serene waters of Silver Lake. The evening light cast gentle ripples across the surface. A reminder of how even the most tranquil appearances could mask complex currents beneath. My life had found its new equilibrium, professional success aligned with personal independence, strategic focus balanced with genuine connection. The disruption Robert had introduced through his betrayal had ultimately catalyzed a more authentic expression of my capabilities and priorities. I had not merely survived his deception, I had transcended it, transforming potential victimhood into definitive agency. The house he had tried to claim remained mine. The career he had often overshadowed now eclipsed his. The future he had jeopardized now expanded with possibilities he could never have envisioned. As I turned away from the window, my gaze fell on the small silver paperweight on my side table, Prevail, catching the last light of day. The word seemed to pulse with quiet affirmation, a simple truth that had guided me through complexity. Some lessons could only be learned through loss. Robert had lost everything by underestimating what I would protect. I had gained everything by understanding exactly what I was worth. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The Withdrew analysis to complete, Catherine Jameson to meet, strategic decisions to make. But tonight, I allowed myself a moment of quiet acknowledgement. The journey from betrayed wife to empowered executive had not been easy, but it had been necessary, not just to recover what was rightfully mine, but to discover what I was truly capable of building. In the end, Robert's betrayal had not been my undoing but my liberation. The price he had paid was measured in years of imprisonment and irreparable disgrace. The value I had gained could be seen in every aspect of my reclaimed life. A life, now expanding with possibility precisely because I had recognized its worth and fought to preserve it. I had prevailed not by destroying Robert, but by refusing to let his choices define my future. That distinction made all the difference. The difference between revenge and reclamation, between reaction and reconstruction. The difference between a life constrained by another's betrayal and one expanded by my own vision. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.